Okay. It's my website and my socials there if anyone's interested in writing them down. I don't post all that much, a little bit on Instagram. And let's make sure this goes. That's my son. He is way cooler than I am. And I'm Corey Cohn. I moved to Baltimore in 2003 to go to MICA. And after that, I never left. And I've worked various IT jobs at MICA ever since, currently as a senior systems business analyst in the Office of Technology. I'm a man of many hobbies. A few of those include gaming, writing horror fiction, and birding. I'm currently playing Demon's Souls, Apex Legends, Fortnite, I know, I get it, and Spider Man. I've written one novel, which for very good reasons remains unpublished, and about 50 short stories, 21 of which are published in various horror magazines and anthologies. In the US, I've seen 182 species of bird, 163 of those in Maryland alone. And in 2016, since 2016, I've submitted 243 checklists to eBird, which is the main data source of my thesis project. I also have a birding partner, my wife, who, along with my son, has been extremely supportive during the 15 months of this program, allowing me the time and freedom to work as hard as I can on the various demanding projects that have taken up so much of my time since this all began, including this one. Good evening, C. Todd, John, and Benjamin, as well as everyone else in attendance tonight. Thank you for being here for our cohort's thesis presentations. It's been an often stressful and at times bizarre 15 months, and I'm extremely proud to have reached this point with such an extraordinary group of people. I've had the privilege of working beside some of the most talented designers and artists I've ever met, without whom I would have not realized this final thesis project. My project being oddly very close to where it all began. This is a picture of the very first homework assignment I did in the program. It was a design assignment. But back to this photo of my wife and I. It was taken on our very first birding trip in April of 2016. We were attending a Saturday open bird walk at a park on a whim while my sister and father were in town. Dad stayed home with Harrison, and my wife and sister and I went to this park to look at birds. It was something to do. They let us borrow the binoculars. The morning in the park, it would turn out, was the most exciting and thrilling experience of my life. The vastness of this hobby became apparent almost immediately. Birding is something you can do anywhere, anytime. All it takes is a little patience or just looking around. My eyes were open to the sheer volume of bird abundance at a place I would never have expected, a park in the middle of my city. My wife and I have been avid birders ever since, often resulting in family photos that look something like this. I have no idea what they could possibly have been looking at because I was looking at a bird. That first trip in 2016 was at Patterson Park, an urban oasis and migratory stopover along the Atlantic Flyway located in Baltimore, Maryland. 218 species of bird have been seen and reported to eBird at the park. The bird walk we attended was hosted by the Patterson Park Audubon Center, a guided Saturday morning walk by a local bird expert. The Patterson Park Audubon Center's mission is, and I quote, to conserve and restore natural ecosystems focusing on birds, other wildlife, and their habitats for the benefit of Baltimore communities and the Earth's biological diversity, end quote. They provide ample opportunities for community members to volunteer with the center and at the park, with nature education programs, bird-friendly gardening events, fundraising, park exploration, wildlife monitoring, and many other exciting activities for kids and adults alike. Simply put, the Patterson Park Audubon Center rocks. As far as stakeholders go, this was a no-brainer for me, as well as Maryland, DC Audubon, and potentially eBird if they wanted to stake this project. Initial ideas for the project included things like a scrollable reactive D3 website or a bound annual report style book of birds at the park, both of which still excite me but proved either technically out of reach or narratively a little too dry without more time to really spend on the project. Eventually, I landed on the idea of a series of posters which would hang in a nature center or other park or Audubon type building where park visitors, may be interested in learning more about the park and its birds. Going into the project, and before digging much into the data at all, I knew I wanted to use R for 90% of the project. R was the first programming language I learned before this program and the one I'm most comfortable with. And as far as I'm concerned, outside of D3, ggplot is the gold standard of visualizing data. This is being recorded because I have a feeling in a year from now I could potentially regret saying that, but we'll see. Visually, I wanted to create something that found a balance between data art, which speaks to my own personal interests in abstract expressionism, and readable information visualization. I wanted to find this balance while also navigating what was certain to be a mountain of data that could quickly overwhelm someone. Rather, I wanted the sheer volume of data to be something that was exciting and not intimidating. In the end, my two main tools for this whole project were R and Illustrator. Before getting to the data, I'd like to mention a few inspirations that guided this project. I knew going into this that there would be a lot of data, so I took inspiration from works like the Jensen Product Portfolio by Natty Bremer, a poster project like mine that dealt with incredible amounts of data. It invites viewers in, despite being so data rich. It makes great use of small multiples, of which bird data can have many. Or this piece by Alberto Lucas Lopez from the June 2020 issue of National Geographic magazine, which for me is one of the strongest works of print database I've ever seen. I love every aspect of this, from the colors to the method in which Alberto dealt with so much historical data. I wanted very much to hit similar notes to both of these pieces, but to also find a balance with work like this, which may seem a bit unusual as an inspiration, but Robert Motherwell and others like Barnett Newman and Mark Rothko have a minimal yet energetic aesthetic that has driven nearly every creative endeavor I've taken in my life. I wanted to find a way to ride that inspiration as well. Now, brace yourselves, here comes a masterpiece. This is a thumbnail sketch from back at the start of this project, which shows where my head was around the time we began thesis prep. I would create a large poster, have a big abstract shape in the center, perhaps a stacked area chart, and interesting small multiples all around. That's enough planning, right? Time to get to the data. Our data set is sourced from eBird Science, which is the scientific wing of eBird.org from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, a web and mobile app used around the world to track and submit bird sightings. To quote from eBird Science, eBird data contributes to hundreds of conservation decisions and peer-reviewed papers, thousands of student projects, and helps inform research worldwide. Applications range from ecological and ornithological research to conservation application to advancing research in the fields of socioeconomics, artificial intelligence, and computer science. The database has over, end quote. The database has over 500 million contributions to date. What makes eBird data so special is that it is entirely built upon the checklist of birders. 500 million checklists submitted into the database detailing not only the bird abundance, but the effort of the birders, the distance they traveled, the places they went, and the people they birded with. eBird data is remarkably personal, and by focusing on Maryland, my own submitted checklists get to be part of the metrics I'll be analyzing. I and thousands of others have helped write the story I hope to tell. This is an example of one of my submitted checklists from May 2019 at Patterson Park. You can see the date. You can see how long I was there. I was there for 3 hours. I miss being able to go birding for 3 hours. And 38 species that day and the various species I saw. The eBird Science portal allows anyone to request access to the entire data set of bird sightings from around the world. That file, by the way, is over a terabyte in size. For my project, I did not need bird data from anywhere except Patterson Park. And so I requested from eBird Science a data set from Maryland only, which is as granular as they'll get. And I requested it from 2009 through 2019. While it seemed tempting to limit the data to only the most recent year, this would risk missing out on particularly exciting sightings that may have happened in years past and could create an inaccurate portrait of bird activity at the park. 10 to 11 years of data seemed like enough time to get a solid footing on what birds visit the park and a wide enough net to grab onto exciting rarities. The resulting unclean data set was just shy of 5 gigs in size and contained 10,658,764 rows by 45 columns. This is for one state and in just 11 years. Thankfully, there's an eBird package, an R package developed by Cornell called awk. And so in R, I was able to use awk. It's specifically designed for handling the gargantuan file sizes that eBird has. Rather than use a typical data frame import in R, I used awk and a standard awk import script to pass the data into R. For anyone who's not familiar with R, I'm basically going to describe everything that's happening in all these scripts. By importing in this fashion, it allowed me to run nested functions within the awk package to do 2 very important steps. One of them is taxonomic rollup. A brief example of what that means is that in any given checklist or series of checklists, some species can have one to many subspecies. That, for the sake of analytics, simply bloats the data. A mallard may be listed as a mallard, or in this example, a Mexican mallard. These functions find all instances of this and roll the subspecies up into the main species of mallard. The other function that awk can do that is remarkably helpful is called zero filling. A birding checklist will track each bird a birder has seen. What it does not do is track the birds that someone didn't see. This is extremely helpful if you want to build something like an area chart or a line chart. If you don't have the zero filled data, the lines will go all over the place. So it aggregated to week, your checklist may look like this: 3 Blackpoll warblers in week 1, blank for week 2, blank for week 3, 1 in week 4, and 15 in week 15. What we need is this. We need a 0 record in week 2 and a 0 record in week 3. Thankfully, awk can do that. One big problem, however, is that awk only can do that if you're running it on the 1.5 terabyte file, which I discovered when trying to do this. For one reason or another, my queried data set, this would not work. So I had to build a zero field data set myself. So in order to do this, I needed to prep everything ahead of time. I knew I wanted to aggregate the checklist data instead of at day level to week level. This would allow for a more manageable data set and a level of granularity to show the sudden and exciting changes of bird abundance in the park. So to start, we'd need to narrow down our eBird data to any columns that had any good storytelling promise. Of the 45 columns present in the eBird data set, I cut things down to 28. I wasn't super selective at this point because I knew I'd be putting quite a bit of time into creating the various workable data sets that I'd need, so I didn't want to have to start over if I missed something. Many of these selected variables here in the end were not used in the final posters. I filtered our data set down to Patterson Park sightings only, which took forever because many Maryland localities unrelated to the park have the word Patterson in them, and using only Patterson Park would have missed out on various alternatively named park locations such as Patterson Boat Lake. At this point, I was ready to take the first step towards various aggregations, which was to create year, month, and week columns in our new data set. Fun fact, our data ranges of 2009 through 2019 contains not one, but 2 leap years. This results in an at first very confusing 53rd week, which happened in both 2012 and 2016, which I didn't discover until I was in the data. So I just had to quickly R-bind in a 53rd week into my week's data set. From there, using a separate spreadsheet of bird data that includes information about bird orders and bird families, a bird, you have your species, it belongs to a family of birds, that family of birds belongs to an order. I joined that data set into my new Patterson Park data set so that I could have additional information about the birds. And then once that was complete, I removed what I'm calling X sightings. In an eBird checklist, if a birder does not see a bird, or is unable to count the abundance of the bird, they have the opportunity to put an X, which says, I observed the presence of this bird. This can really mess with your analytics a little bit because it's an X inside of all your observation counts, but it also can lead to inaccurate counts. One solution could be to make an estimate of how many birds they might have seen based on previous year's data, or to just remove the rows. I noticed there was only 2,300 rows that had X's on them, so I just removed the rows from the data set. And so you can see the totals there. Originally it was 57,000. It went down to about 55,000. All these steps are just a few of the many, many data prep steps that I had to do for the entirety of the project. And so this zero filled data set one is the only one I really want to go into in detail. So in order to create this data set, I created unique listings of every order, family, and bird, which is the right-hand side table. It's just a crop of it. It's thousands or hundreds of rows long. And then merge that with my week's data set so that every bird in that data set is present in every week. And so all we have is a week number. You'll see it on the right, the week number and the presence of a ring-billed gull and no counts. But this way, if a bird was not present during a week, I have the opportunity to put a 0 in there. Okay. And there it is. Okay, so then we group our Patterson Park data by week, summarize the average observations, and join these results to the big list of birds and weeks. This step was done for things like checklist IDs and observer IDs as well. Whew. By the end of the project, I'd written over 2,000 lines of code and used 11 packages. But for now, we had our data set. For anyone unfamiliar with R, this is the very exciting moment where I turned my crazily named data set into a data set name that makes a lot more sense, which is my final Patterson Park data frame. Let's get to work. With my data set in hand, I set off to work with what I believed was a strong narrative and a remarkably compelling story. Here's this park that I love and the birds that visit it. How cool is that? So I started exploring various shapes that the data could take. For instance, here is a stacked area chart, similar to the one in my thumbnail sketch that seemed like a promising start for a poster. So using this, I created a mock-up of what a hypothetical poster might look like in a nature center. That's kind of neat. But before long, and naturally, I veered off in the wrong direction. Data this rich has many opportunities for some extremely beautiful graphics, and I was quick to explore many of them and to be taken in by the abstract wonder that bird data can produce. This is an early rendering of a radial line graph, where each line represents the average observations of a bird species in the park. The radial spans 53 weeks from start to finish, and when you switch any particular shape from line to area, it creates a really wonderful pattern. No two patterns are ever alike, sort of like a portrait or a fingerprint. I loved this thought and idea, but despite this being visually very appealing to me, it was all but unreadable. Data art maybe, but not much beyond that. Here's another version of that with even more areas filled in. So what solution might there be for readability? What about breaking things out into family level? Color-wise, I went a little 80s retro here, which might have been because I was listening to synth pop that afternoon or something, but I really enjoyed what was happening here. I love the way that you could compare the birds of any family to each other. But once again, despite being very visually appealing to me, this poster presented its own challenges. How do I label each bird without overwhelming the poster with type? Well, maybe I had to let the radials go and follow a more traditional path with a dendrogram, a nice, reliable, readable dendrogram. Color in the families a little bit, get some labels in there. It's nice, but it's a little too regal for my tastes. This is better. Look at that arc diagram. It's whimsical. It's downright poetic. It doesn't matter that it looks a little bit like a horsetail. It's stunning. But who was our audience again? It's park visitors. Who am I kidding? Just turn that thing on its side. Toss some timelines on there with some abundance counts. Make it pink. That's so minimal. It's so pretty. I love it. There's got to be an answer somewhere. So maybe I'll try something like this. This draft got a little closer. Here we've got this flowery bloom shape thing, which is every species at the park, surrounded by a radial bar chart tracking the cumulative total families of bird that have visited the park on average every year. Then each of those families is exploded out into its own little radial, and a visitor can follow along with the weeks to see what has arrived. But this feels off too, and it's still pretty unreadable. Let's go one level down. Here's a similar chart, but only for warblers. Now we're getting somewhere, I think. Suddenly, we can see the little data fingerprints of each species of bird has left in the park. It's neat, if a little impersonal, and maybe a little too narrow as well. So here's a poster of every single bird at the park. It has 47 colors. Here's another one. This chart tracks the cumulative total of birds that have been recorded at the park by week. So the bars at the bottom are the very first birds to be recorded every year. Okay, but it still has 47 colors, and am I really just trying to make an abstract expressionist painting here? Here's a version of it. Oh, that's this one. Fell out of place here. Here's a version of that one, all in black. I call this Ode to Robert Motherwell. I found I was exploring ideas that contained only one true through line after all, which was every bird. For instance, this piece tracks the number of checklists that every bird appears on rather than abundance. And here's a bunch of them shoved together because why not? I was feeling pretty lost in the birds at this point. The truth is I never had a through line at all, didn't I? I'd lost sight of it pretty early on. The few you've seen tonight are among the more than 100 iterations I threw against the wall in search of a story that at first I'd been so confident I knew. I was lost. But after a long brainstorming session with my wife, I recalled the beautiful work of John James Audubon's Birds of America. This is one of the prints from that book, of a black-throated blue warbler. I put together two sketches, data homages to these prints. This one of a cedar waxwing with some statistics below it, how many birders have seen the bird in the data range, and how many checklists it appeared on, and how many weeks it was present at the park. And this one is of a yellow warbler. I felt like I was getting close to something at last, or something that at least felt honest. And after all of this work, I realized I'd left out one other really important thing. This is a quote from my neighbor and friend, Erin Reed Miller. She is the education manager at the Patterson Park Audubon Center. Though my data was in fact all the birds that have been seen at Patterson Park, it still felt like it could be any park in the world. What is something special and unique to Patterson Park that can make these posters theirs? If you close your eyes and listen, it sounds a little bit like birding in the park in spring or in fall, especially with that unmistakable song of the wood thrush. These are the 5 priority birds of Patterson Park. These birds were identified by Patterson Park Audubon Center in association with Audubon, Maryland, D.C. scientists as those which would be most impacted by the center's conservation efforts in and around the park and city. They are the Baltimore oriole, the black-throated blue warbler, the chimney swift, wood thrush, and American woodcock. My goodness, I found my through line. You'll notice in the final posters that I'm about to display that they include many of the ideas and sketches I've shown already, though much more ended up on the cutting room floor. Our first poster is called A Priority of the Park. It is a semi-deep dive into the priority birds themselves. We can see over the date range how many birders saw them, how many checklists they appeared on, and how many weeks total they are present in any given year at the park on average. There's also a tidbit about what to look for to find them, and their abundance radial for a guide. I've also included a slope chart to show if there's been any noticeable change in the abundance levels of these birds since 2009. The next poster is called The Birds of Patterson Park. I wanted a way for people to explore every bird that visits the park, but in an organized way. Returning to our dendrogram, I made it circular and highlighted our priority birds to easily find them. This felt like a good opportunity to take a data risk, and I included some radios strictly for comparison's sake. No axis, labels, no guides, but rather a chance to see what the presence of a priority bird looks like in comparison to other species in their family. This poster is called When Are They Here? I wanted to provide a general sense of when these birds are here, and so I produced abundance charts for each and every bird at the park, and included a chart that tracks the count of every species in any given week at the park. So we can see week 18 is the week on average when the most species visit the park. So we can kind of go through up close and see these little prints. I keep calling them bird prints or fingerprints of the birds at the park. And the final one is called a guest book for the park. I wanted to acknowledge the work of the birders with some data on the actual checklists and checklisting habits. There's really not much as exciting as seeing the rare tag on a bird you've entered into a checklist. On eBird, if you spotted a particularly rare bird, it blasts an email to anyone who is listed on the rare bird mailing list and alerts them to your find. Talk about thrilling. This felt like a great place to highlight a few select exciting rarities that have visited the park since 2009, such as the black-bellied whistling duck of 2011 or the snowy egret in 2012. At the top, a lollipop chart indicates how many people have reported seeing each bird, and in the middle, the dot sizes represent the number of checklists on average a bird appears on in that given week. If I had more time, I would actually like to create the interactive D3 site to allow a more exploratory experience with the data from Patterson Park. But thankfully, eBird exists, and you can do things like that on eBird. But right now, I think I'm creating something that's exciting and useful that eBird doesn't already do, which is a nice personal portrait of the park. But the D3 site, maybe that'll come in 2021. I'd also like to create the bird fingerprint versions of the entirety of the John James Audubon Birds of America book, which I think could be fun and a lot of work. Of course, going forward, I'd love to share this project with the Patterson Park Audubon Center and perhaps get more involved with the center and any analytic needs that they have. Here's my credits and sources. And in the end, though my audience on paper was park visitors, the truth is the audience was myself. This was a more personal project to me than I cared to admit at first, because Patterson Park is very personal to me. Now that it's done, I look forward to returning more often and getting reacquainted with the birds and people I've missed out on while in school. Thank you all for your time.
Corey, that was fantastic. I actually, that entire process was amazing. And I really appreciated you making the callback to Audubon's book, Birds of America, and actually seeing that inspiration kind of just show up in the way that it did. And it was very much a personal project. And like you said, it was very specific to Patterson Park, and how that you mentioned just those 5 birds, and you kind of focused in on those birds and you kind of kept them all together. And I'm curious as to if technology wasn't an issue, if you didn't have to learn everything about D3, if you already had that skill set ready, how would you design this to be more interactive? What would have been the major changes? How could you make this more personal to different parks? And how would you just reach out to the larger audience?
It's a great question. So I had planned out the whole D3 thing, and the direction I was likely going to go was something akin to one of those scrolly sites where as you go, you could start out with a little dot and you scroll down and the data viz grows and changes. And what I was hoping to create was a scrollable timeline of the park, which then, I could script out the R script so that it filters each park, and hopefully we can make it pretty quick, like build the whole one for Patterson Park and then change the filter and do another one for Lake Roland. But ideally, I would love to have a scrolly site where you scroll from January 1st all the way to December 31st and watch a mutating data viz. So as birds or bird families arrive at the park, different dots, arrive and then they'll leave, kind of like watching the ebb and flow of bird life in the park, which I think could be personal and exciting. And so that's the ideal vision for a more interactive storytelling experience that I think keeps it personal. You could go a dashboard, but I think even in a dashboard, you lose some of that personal touch and you lose control, I think, of certain story elements. And I think if you had the control, like if the narrative was, here's the birds that come and the birds that go, I think that could be something really exciting.
Yeah, I hope to see that scrolly telling site in the future someday. Obviously, get back to your life, but maybe in the future that'd be amazing to see.
JT, any questions from you?
I don't think I have any questions. It's just it's a tremendous amount of work went into this, and it's an engaging story, and I've really learned a lot. It's nice to see that love of nature within Baltimore and expressed so elegantly.
Thank you.
So Corey, aside from the interactive piece and in these the 4 static pieces you have, you talked about this earlier in my course. I'm curious, how might you adapt some of this to be like on a sign at the park? And I know you thought a little bit about that. Have you given any more thought to that? And how would you start to think about where you've arrived finally? And how could you make this like an installation at a park or a bunch of parks?
It's a great question. I've thought about, of the 4, I feel like the one that would be most appropriate for, like, those outdoor nature signs that are weatherproof and you'll see them on a trail. The first one of the 4, I think, is a little, I wouldn't have the slope chart on there, but like, or maybe even get rid of the radials, but like if I had more straightforward statistics that someone could encounter, at the park. So, and it would be more of an educational tool about, here's the priority birds, here's how many were there. Even if it was like simple bar charts for the abundance. And I'm mostly thinking about approachability. I personally love the radials, but I wonder if someone who hasn't seen a radial chart before, if it might be a challenging visualization to get into. I could be wrong about that, but like, I'm not entirely sure how to feel about that, but I feel like, cause I'm thinking like broader audience of anyone who's walking by it who might see it and want to encounter it. But I think that's that direction where I'm getting into specific birds and teaching them something about the park. So it'd be about the birds, but especially about, here's the priority birds. Why are they priority? And what are things that are happening to help their habitat?
Yeah. I like that. And some sort of timeline that shows like there's this element of January to December of like, when are the different birds there? I think that's really, that's super interesting. Cool. Great work. I just, really love to see I love the iterations that you went through. Even in the course, you showed some of them here through your stories.
Yeah, I had a habit of having an entirely different looking project every week.
Yeah. I'm curious. I don't know if we talked about. I don't think we talked about this in class. But when I look to sort of give a squint test to these 4, the one that seems odd, like the one that stands out a little bit, that is the 3rd one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to get a little bit, since we have a little bit extra time. Tell me about the choices you made with this one in particular. I'm curious about the palette choices and the darker, the shaded background of the graphs.
So one of the reasons I went that direction was because I went with a dark gray specifically because I wanted to have a heaviness on that side. It felt like, in this one, this is not a heavy color, but it's a heavy image. And so it's taking up much of that side. And then we've got all the bird pictures here. And so I was mostly thinking about, how can I have this heavy right-hand side? So I went with a darker image, but I also wanted to tone back all the other birds with enough information there that if someone gets in close, they can go, oh, I got a general sense of when these birds are here. But but keeping that focus on the priority birds. I agree. This is the one that I feel like works the least for me as well. I'm still pretty happy with it, but I think it's a challenge, I think, to try to solve a solution for every bird without it starting to just feel almost. A lot of versions of this, which one of them I might have shown, just look like posters that you would put on your wall that you wouldn't even really look at. It's just visually kind of nice. But I wanted to try to get as close as I could to show every single bird that came to the park. And this is as far as I got, for a solution. I think it still works, but I agree. I don't think it's working as well as the other ones.
Okay, yeah, good. Thank you for that description. I appreciate that. Any questions from anybody else? Open this up to the rest of the floor since we have a little bit of time.
By all means.
Yeah.
I'll go back to all 4.
And I'm curious, are you familiar with RJ Andrews or Info We Trust? One of his first major projects that got him notoriety was one on endangered species in the Sahara. And this actually, I can't pinpoint it, but there's something about this project, whether that reminds me of that. And I suggest that maybe if you haven't already, I would take a look at that. It's different, but he shows a lot of different species of animals on a single chart, and he prevents it from being overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll check that out. I'd love to. Maybe I've seen it. I recognize the name, but I'm not entirely sure. Thank you.
All right. Awesome work, Corey. Thank you. What a great way to start the evening.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.